This lady is my grandmother. She died in July last year. She was 95 years old, and she suffered from severe heart failure for a long period of time. She died in her own house, surrounded by her loved ones. She died in her own house, not only because she wanted to, but because she shared her wishes with her closest loved ones and with her doctor. Who of you has ever discussed your end-of-life wishes with your loved ones? What's the most important in your life? Quality of life, or how long you have to live? Are there maybe circumstances in which you believe that life isn't worth living anymore? Many of you might think, I don't have to think about the end of life. I'm not 95 years old. When I look around, I believe that's true. But I'm going to show you today why it is important for you and your loved ones to discuss your end-of-life wishes. In fact, some of us will be elderly. Some of us will have a life-limiting illness. But many of us will get a life-limiting illness somewhere in our lives. Maybe you have parents or grandparents or a loved one with a life-limiting illness. Do you know their end-of-life preferences? For example, would they prefer treatment focusing on prolonging life when they had a stroke and if they are no longer able to communicate with you? Or would they prefer comfort care in such a situation? We are all going to die, you, me, and our loved ones. Nobody can tell us when that will be. It can be when we are 95 years old, just like my grandmother. It can also be tomorrow. A century ago, most deaths occurred suddenly. Due to accidents, infections, around childbirth, people didn't have time to think about such a thing as end-of-life care. But nowadays, demographic transitions, like aging of the population and a shift in causes of death towards chronic diseases, cause a major change in the experience of dying. And the experience of dying becomes increasingly a feature of old age. Because of the developments in modern medicine, people often survive acute illnesses. But they may live for many years with progressive chronic diseases. They may have severe limitations in performing their daily life activities, impaired quality of life, and maybe they're going in and out of the hospital because of acute episodes of their chronic disease. Or maybe they are living in a nursing home because of a high level of care dependency. And medical care is still mainly focusing on prolonging life, and the likelihood that a patient will die because of his or her disease is often ignored, and dying is often seen as a failure of medicine. And I will never forget a family meeting which I had when I was a 24-year-old doctor in the nursing home. One of my patients, a very old lady with dementia, was deteriorating fast, and actually I had no idea what was wrong with her. I spoke to the family and I told them a list of possible diagnoses which she might have, which could explain why she was deteriorating. The family was listening to me, very patient. And at the end of my extensive list, they quietly said to me, "Doctor, she's just worn out." This family was ready for her dying. I, as a young ambitious doctor, I wasn't. And I will always remain grateful for what this family taught me. Autonomy becomes increasingly important in our society, and the expectations about the end of life change. We want to influence everything in our lives, but we also want to influence the end of life. But to be able to do this, timely discussions with our loved ones and our doctors about what's important in our lives and about our treatment preferences are important. And these discussions are named advanced care planning discussions. Advanced care planning improves care at the end of life for patients and their loved ones. And we know now that people who had these discussions are more likely to receive care according to their preferences. As an elderly care physician, end-of-life discussions are now part of my daily work. However, these conversations never become easy, and even for elderly patients with advanced illnesses, facing the end of life can be very challenging. And a while ago, I was caring for an 82-year-old gentleman with advanced lung disease, and he was bound to a wheelchair. He used a high dosage of oxygen, and he couldn't perform any physical activity because of severe breathlessness. He spoke to me about a recent experience in the hospital and that he felt that he was going to die. We discussed his fear for suffocation and how palliative care can prevent suffering in the dying phase. One day later, his wife called me. She was very upset. Actually, she was very angry with me. She was very angry that I spoke with her husband about dying. I tried to explain to her that I discussed this as part of a hope for the best but prepare for the worst approach. But after this moment, any conversation with the couple about the end of life became impossible. A few weeks later, he was discharged home. And 2 months later, we heard that he died in the hospital. I don't know whether he wanted to die in the hospital or whether he would have preferred to die at home. I don't know this because his end-of-life preferences were never discussed. For other patients, preparing for the end of life is very important. And last summer, a 60-year-old gentleman was admitted to my unit. He had severe lung disease for many years, and he was not only using oxygen therapy, but also non-invasive ventilation. Before he came to my unit, he was living at home alone. And every morning, the home care nurse came and she helped him with washing, dressing, and prepared his breakfast. In the afternoon, he went with his scooter to see some friends and drink a coffee. Every day the same. This was the only thing he could do, but he was satisfied with his life. When he came to my unit, he was bedbound. He needed help with performing all his daily life activities, and he was using his non-invasive ventilation mask for almost 24 hours a day. He was very clear to me. If he was not going to improve his level of functioning, and if he couldn't be discharged home again, his life wasn't worth living anymore. We started with intensive therapy, but despite this, he did not improve. And he would need his ventilation mask for 24 hours a day, and he couldn't be discharged home again. We had open discussions about his life goals, about his prognosis, and about his treatment options. And he decided to forego any life-prolonging treatment. He knew that he was going to die, and he prepared for it. He finished everything he wanted to do. He found closure. And a few weeks later, he died peacefully in the presence of his loved ones. A few weeks later, I spoke with his family. And of course, they were very sad. But even more, they were very grateful about the valuable time they spent together in his final weeks of life. These two patients clearly show us that people differ in how they want to face the future. People differ in their needs and desires for hope and explicit prognostic information. But to achieve a good death, advanced care planning is necessary. And in the past, advanced care planning was mainly seen as preparing advanced directives, documenting wishes concerning life-sustaining treatments. One of these life-sustaining treatments is CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. When your heart stops beating, there's no time or opportunity to discuss your preferences regarding CPR. But chest compressions should be started as soon as possible or should not be started at all. But why would anyone even consider to forego CPR? CPR is quite successful, isn't it? At least that's what we see on television. Together with a colleague, I've watched 68 episodes of ER, House, and Grey's Anatomy. And we saw 47 CPR attempts. 51% were successful. 38% were not successful, and it was not shown in 11%. But these are real-life data. When you don't have a chronic disease and you need CPR while you are in the hospital, you have 17% chance that you will survive until discharge. If you have a chronic lung disease or cancer, your chances are even lower. And moreover, only 5 to 7% will be discharged home, and the other survivors will be discharged, for example, to a nursing home. So documenting preferences regarding CPR is important, but we also know now the limitations of advanced directives. Life-sustaining treatments preferences are likely to change. And moreover, it is very difficult to make decisions in advance about future unknown scenarios. And to illustrate this, I want to use a quote of a loved one of a patient that I've read in a paper from Rebecca Sudore. And this loved one said, "We got the DNR in writing, but in making decisions, which there were many, this was just one. And the first decision was whether to put him in a nursing home. We were married for 30 years, and I could no longer take care of him. The second decision was whether to put him on a feeding tube, because he had stopped eating, and I wasn't ready to let him go." So advanced care planning is not about deciding everything in advance and signing lots of papers. Advanced care planning is about talking with your loved ones and your doctors about what's important in your life and what quality of life means to you. And this will help your doctors and your loved ones with making the best possible decisions for you when you are no longer able to participate in the decision-making process. For example, when you are lying in the ICU, unconscious. It will help them to offer you the treatment as you would have wanted, taking into account your values and your life goals. It allows you to live the way you want, but also to die the way you want. It allows your family members to go on after your death. We know now that loved ones of patients who died, who had advanced care planning discussions, are less likely to suffer from anxiety and depression. But to achieve this, we have to talk about dying. We have to be aware of the fact that we are all going to die. We don't know when, but we can prepare. We can overcome fears just by talking about it. So when you go home today, just think about it. Think about your end-of-life wishes. Discuss with your loved ones their end-of-life wishes. Be prepared.